me up and welcome to the Temple of Bleh, episode C, with Takis, Kinis of thrash prog metal legends Realm. I'm speaking super quiet because it's in the middle of the night, and I was just insisting that this go out on the 30th of October, because the 30th of October 2020 is the 30th anniversary of Realm's second and final album, Suiciety. And I think that's really, really, really important because they're an absolutely kick-ass band. So Takis himself was super, super accommodating in this recording. Technically, his rig was superior in that he recorded the session and sent it to me, and he had working audio. You'll notice in the first 20 minutes of this session, my mic, it just starts acting robotic and is acting really weird. It's a problem I think I've fixed now. But nonetheless, just be wary that even though it sounds completely shite in that time, it does get better for about 25 minutes in when I swap mics over. But yeah, please join me in celebrating this kick-ass band. And rest in peace, Paul Laganowski, who is the founding guitarist for Realm, who passed away in 2017. So I'm sure he would endorse my ringing in of this interview with Takis with a resounding 1, 2, fuck shit up.
All right. Absolutely.
Don't be ridiculous. So first of all, thanks very much for giving me your time, especially at such short notice. And happy anniversary to Suiciety.
Well, thank you. I guess I wasn't even thinking about that, but this is right around the time it came out, and back in, I think, the fall of 1990, we were hitting the road at this time. We were probably out on the West Coast or something, and I think at that point we were touring with Annihilator and Reverend, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Pretty interesting.
Yeah, this is 30th of October, so a week tomorrow is the anniversary.
Oh, wow. You know, and I'm sitting here in my basement workshop, and just a couple feet away from me here, I had an old box of Realm flyers and posters and whatnot, and I got to the bottom of the box, and in the bottom of the box was a LP still in the shrink wrap, original pressing, and I was like, "Holy cow!"
Amazing.
Yeah, you know, and the artwork on that one is beautiful. The guy who created it, Peter Hedman, is just a local musician friend of ours, and we just kind of pitched the idea of what the word meant, and he came back with that as a physical piece of art. And it's actually a photograph of a physical piece of art, you know, and even the glass breaking was done on site in the photographer's studio. It wasn't done beforehand. He's like, I have this piece of glass. Hopefully this works. You know? But we look back on that very fondly, you know. Yeah, cracking skulls.
Yeah. Where do I want to start? I want to, because this is all about Roadrunner and those kind of interactions. There's not going to be, I think the music of Realm is really well documented. You did an interview with Metal Sucks about 10 years ago, which is really good and really thorough. I'm going to touch on some of those points because you've had 10 years to reflect. But I want to get the signal boost out of the way, because I think Realm, I don't think there's such thing as a band that's gone. It's the metal's for life. And I think everyone should listen to those two albums because they're shit on, mate. Because I came across Realm in researching this, and it's very much like, what the fuck? How is this not? This encapsulates everything great about 80s metal, like in two albums. That's how I'd sell it to someone anyway. And it's really killer. So I'm gonna get the annoying stuff out of the way first, which is So you guys activated again?
Well, I guess that's that's a tough question to answer, because I guess technically, you know, if you say, hey, are you in a band? I would answer no, you know, although the rest of the guys might answer yes. I think Mark and I would probably be the ones to answer no, you know, the singer and I, because we're the two that kind of, when Realm ended, we really didn't pursue music as a thing. You know, I was an academic at the time, you know, I was working on multiple degrees, and Mark moved away and followed, you know, ironically also a career path in IT. But we just kind of stayed away from it. All the other guys stayed pretty darn active. I think, you know, Paul perhaps kind of stayed away from it too. But would we say that we're active? I suppose because we have shows that we're supposed to play, so I guess we're a band. But it's like, are we actively rehearsing and getting together? Was kind of hard when people live, hundreds or thousands of miles away. I do have two of the guys that live here in town in Milwaukee. So I guess, sure, let's say we're a band, because if we do play over in Europe, we will need to rehearse. And unfortunately, we weren't wise, and we didn't write riffs that were easy. We wrote very complicated, nuanced, filled music that requires a significant amount of rehearsal, even though we, wrote it just to kind of come up to fluff to play it, because it's just physically challenging music. It really floored me when I had to relearn it. Yeah. And then more importantly, teach it to somebody else to play, right? Like, holy cow, how did that go? And then I would have to put the headphones on and figure out, okay, I played this, Paul played that. And that was the irony too. We never played the same guitar parts, even though it sounds like it at times. But that was a conscious effort.
It's, you guys, well, age hasn't slowed you down one bit, because I saw some footage of that, the Wisconsin area music industry Hall of Fame, that show. And it was like, this is great. It's good to see everyone was just into it. You know what I mean? It was poignant for me as someone who was entering the 30s to go, right, it's nice to know that in X amount of years I'll still be headbanging, and there's nothing's gonna physically restrain me from doing such a thing.
Well, that is a thing, because it does get to your neck after a while, and I know, I think of some of my friends who used to just kind of have, the whole headbanging thing going on, and how many of them are not alive right now? I mean, that's a whole separate story. So I feel fortunate to still be here and to be able to do it, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, when I go to gigs now, I do stretches. I do a bit of yoga before I go to gig, because it means I can headbang, and then I don't have a hangover the next day, and I feel like, okay, so that's my advice. Well, we always used to think that you had to practice the headbanging part of it, even during rehearsal. So, we would have rehearsal and we would be just full at it, because that way you're ready for the stage, right? You don't do it when you get to the stage. You do it because you must. It's a, compulsion or whatever, So again, to bands being active, bands sort of coming back from earlier days. The first thing I've noticed is when I'm researching all these old Roadrunner bands, it's really interesting to see years active, 85 to 88, the reunion show in 90 and 95, and then all of them for some reason have 2017 to present active. And I don't know what it is. I think it may be because they're coming towards sort of like the twilight years of their conventional careers, and they're realizing, you know what, there was never any fucking money in this game. We just did it because we like to do it, and everyone's still friends, and they just crack on and do it. And I think that's good to know as well. Do you think that was something that informed the decision to, do those reunited shows? Well, it was kind of, I think, a combination of things. I think that is certainly an aspect, because I look at the way that I live my life, and my wife and I are huge music fans. One of the reasons we hit it off in the first place, and one of our favorite things to do, and it doesn't really matter even the form of music that it is to go out and see live music. And now, since the pandemic, for example, we haven't. I think maybe we've seen, I don't think we've seen any live music, since probably late February. And fortunately, the last thing I got to see was Opeth in New York City. We actually traveled all the way to see the show because we missed it when they were around here. So we said, hey, you know what, let's just drive to New York. What the heck, let's go see the show. 2 weeks later, everything's like locking down. And where were we? Ground zero in New York City, where the pandemic is, like really taken off in the U.S. But I think you're absolutely right. There's this aspect where I think a lot of us are still able to do it. In fact, like Mike and Steve from the band are very active in several musical projects, and so they're like razor sharp on their playing. They're just, I'm going to say they're better than they've ever been. I really don't play the guitar that much. I actually have one in my lap here. You can't see it because Zoom is kind of filtering it. What my students don't know is when I teach through Zoom, I often have a guitar on my lap because it's kind of like almost like a security blanket, so I can just like play a riff and get back to normal. But the thing that really kind of made it kind of strange for us and really triggered it, frankly, was the passing of Paul Leganowski, who was, along with me, one of the founding members of the band. And a dear, dear friend. And it hit us really, really hard because he announced to us that he had pancreatic cancer. God, it was a little over 2 years ago, and then it was like, oh my God, this is horrible. And it was a very short window of time that he went from like being himself to he couldn't see anybody because he was so medicated to being full of tubes and poof, gone, and barely a chance to even talk to him. It really hit us all hard. I mean, if we had like time to kind of connect more, I don't know, I get pretty emotional just thinking about it. And because of that, we got together at his, I guess, life celebration, if you want to call it that. So instead of having like a funeral in a funeral home, we found this little corner pub basically in Milwaukee, old Polish polka bar, where people would sit there and play their concertinas and their accordions. And we thought it was a perfect place for him because he was Polish by nature. He loved to drink beer and hang out at little corner places just like that. And unrehearsed, we got up and we played a few songs. And I mean, it was pretty evident, it's like, holy cow, I didn't even really practice this stuff. You didn't either. We all got together, boom, and it sounded great. I mean, really with a minimal amount of effort. So we're like, hey, there's still something here. All these years later, there's some sort of intangible, and this happens in music, right? And I can see in the background you play also, and you can sit down with a group of people, and you can play with some musicians, and nothing clicks, right? And then you get with certain people, and the magic's there. And Paul had that magic because he just brought something special to the table, and without him, I'll be real frank, I don't think it can ever really be Realm without him. Because we've swapped members, but Paul and I were the constants right from the beginning, and wrote all the music pretty much, but yeah, that brought us kind of that impetus to that we can possibly do it. We didn't have any plans after that memorial to go out and play. We just got a call one day from the Wisconsin music industry saying, hey, we want to put you in our Hall of Fame. We're like, what? Okay. I'm like, hey, by the way, do you want to play at the award show? All right, we can pull off a couple of songs. So sure, why not? And then the guy's like, well, I'm also a promoter and we could set up a concert the night before. And we're like, all right, well, that means I have to learn more than one or two songs. Okay, fine. So we had plenty of time to prepare for it. So we had, I want to say 6, 7, 8 months to prepare. We found somebody to fill Paul's shoes. At first I had this like crazy thought that we would play 3-piece. And if you ever listen to Realm music and, put the headphones on and hear the two guitars doing their different things, it's just impossible, No harmonizer pedal can pull that stuff off, No
way.
Yeah, not at all. And then, then there's the personality that goes behind it too. And that was a little bit of a conundrum as well. So, because Paul brought, it wasn't the skill of what he played, it was the personality behind what he played. And I think that's true of a lot of the bands that you're probably going to interview in this process, is you'll see there's tons of musicians out there. There's a million guitar players that can play better than me, but it's the chemistry, it's the feeling, it's the impetus. I don't know what some magic spark or something that makes it all happen. I feel fortunate to have been part of it, really.
Well, it seems like when I say the telling of the Roadrunner story is becoming, to me, because I came into Roadrunner in 2005 with Trivium, which is a metalcore band, so it was way past the conventional time. For either yourself or for what people might identify a Roadrunner to be. But the example with Paul there is it's critical to gather the information because no one else has. And guess what? It's fleeting.
I think that's pretty amazing what you're doing, and I think for us in the bands, that you're especially we're not a Sepultura or Type O Negative, but we didn't have that same kind of notoriety, but we were almost there. It's like almost it. That musicians always say that. So we kind of appreciate the fact that we're remembered. Yeah, absolutely. We're honored. We're part of the canon of modern music. It's kind of the way I see it. If you put a record out, at least back in that day, you stepped up from like the club band to, you're a real band,
Yeah.
Um, So.
Yeah. So obviously this is my last thing, and then we'll jump into my actual question, which I did prepare. In the course of, obviously you mentioned earlier that there's a geographical challenge to playing music for Realm. Obviously there's an emotional aspect which is going to forbid it from happening. But obviously the digitization of everything has come on in the last, especially sort of 5 years. When they created SSD cards, I think that was a catalyst. And especially in the pandemic, you're seeing a lot of bands making music and making movements just from remote locations. Is that not an option for you? Could you not ring up Mark and say, hey man, I've got this thing on Ableton, can I just throw it your way and we'll see what happens?
It's funny that you say that, because I have been kind of doing a little bit of work like that. So like our follow-up project to Realm, our drummer in that outfit was remixing some of the tracks from the band called like Fear Chain. It's our follow-up project. And we did a little bit of that, where he'd send me a mix and I'd record a part over it and send it back. And, I know it's completely possible, and I certainly have the technical wherewithal to pull it off. For me, it's more of an aspect of time, because
Totally.
I'm a busy working professional, basically. I chair the IT department where at the school where I teach, and I have a very heavy teaching load on top of it all. And then I have a wife and kid and family and a life, and this is not my bread and butter. I just love to listen and play music, but yeah. You get the picture. I mean, life happens,
Totally. I mean, my missus has been very, very understanding. But I think also she's like, I'm giving her too much praise. She'll never see this, so it's fine. I think she knows that when I'm doing it, I spend a lot of time trying to set these kind of things up and record as much as I can, because I'm an academic sort of like by my background as well, but my background is in commercial law, so it makes me very effective at reading and recording. I find so it takes a lot longer to get it right, and she seems to understand that it's important to me that the story's told. It doesn't matter what happens with it. If it's dumped on this shitty timeline software or in PowerPoint and put somewhere in perpetuity, is that the word? Perpetuity, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with you, because it really kind of, it's the same thing as doing the recordings, right? So when we put those albums out, it's a snapshot of a picture in time. And for me, like when I listen to those records, I can't help but think of like the situations that were happening at that time while we were recording, right? So that's captured into the music, because who we were as people, the emotions we were feeling, the relationships we had, whatever issues or problems, that's evident emotionally in the music. When I listen to it, I can hear it. Others just go, hey, that's really killer. But I feel, kind of through the music to the players that were like generating it and what they were going through. And so for me, I have that perspective on it. But I think you're right, though, because it's kind of like a photograph. Somebody's got to chronicle it, and I'm glad it's you. Somebody's doing it.
Someone's got to do it, man. This is why that point's so cool, though, because at the moment in time, because I know the end of the Suiciety was meant to bleed into the third album when it was going to happen. So you're going to have a point in time, an interlinking thing, and another point in time. And I think that's so cool. That's like tool level architecture around music. I think that's really badass.
Yeah, and now see, I have the benefit of having the guitar in my lap, right? And so I don't know if you can pick that up or not, but
okay.
I could dial in a clean sound here. Maybe I won't even bother, just turn the volume down. But there's a little riff at the end of there where it goes. And anyhow, it's just like a little painting of some chords that come in at the end out of the explosion. And the truth is, we never finished writing it because the band broke up before we finished writing it. But the impetus was that's going to be the beginning of the next record, and it would kind of like flow into this whole concept or whatever. Whatever. We were trying to be all clever back then, but we thought a lot about the stuff when we recorded it. We put a lot, maybe a lot more into it than we even should have. We spent a lot of time recording. We had the luxury when we recorded that second album of having the studio to ourselves. We usually, like the first album was like, I think 1 week of tracking and like maybe 10 days of mixing, literally working like 18, 20-hour days with hardly any sleep because, the studio time was super expensive back then.
Yep.
But get to the second record and we had the studio locked out for like 3-4 months. We go there anytime we want and do whatever we want. So we took our time,
Yep. I've got a question on exactly that point later on. How are you fixed for time? Because I've got what have I got? I've got 12 questions, and I want to be able to jog it along if I need to or whatever.
Well, I don't teach for another 2.5 hours, so
perfect. I want to take
as long as you need. As long as you need, I'm good.
Appreciate it, man. All right. We've gone on to this is another slightly non-Roadrunner link, but I keep finding information about a link to Beatallica, but without anything concrete. What's that about? You guys also in Beatallica as well?
Well, let's talk about that one. So Beatallica is a kind of a I don't know what you call it, a mashup, and they call themselves a mashup band, right? Cool. Because they're a little bit different than a mashup. But they're just some local friends of ours that put this project together as a joke, basically, at this like local event that we have every year called Spoof Fest, where local musicians will imitate other artists. And one time, maybe 20 years ago, maybe something like that, they imitated the Beatles playing in Metallica style, right? So like if you could take the Beatles and whatever. And long story short, they got a lot of attention from it, including a lot of trouble from it. But Metallica actually ran to their aid and kind of stood behind them a little bit and said, hey, no, these guys are cool. They're okay. Let's work it out. And, they've gotten pretty popular. And for a very short stint, I played with them because they lost their guitar player. They were doing a tour. And I think I did all of 2 rehearsals. And then we hit the road and played for a few weeks. And that was about all I did with them. Just played a few shows. Okay. It wasn't really kind of the right scene for me. I wasn't, I was not ready to be a touring musician at that point. I was in the midst of raising young children. But currently, our old bass player, Steve Post, is now their bass player. And, they're not touring right now, obviously, but they are playing a few shows here and there, and they are recording. And so they're just close friends of ours. I think there was maybe, I don't know, I like to think there was a little bit of an inspiration when we did the Beatles cover, they maybe stole a little bit of that idea or whatever, but yeah, so cool. Hey, Steve is currently their bass player.
Yeah, I remember the press cycle around that when Metallica came to their aid. But I was just curious because there was a few. I think the only evidence I could find of Steve playing with them was on his Facebook, not the website or anything like that. So, yeah,
he's a fairly recent addition to that project. So
yeah, cool. Hey, there's a lot of money in tribute projects. I know this is a mashup, but I work in the live industry with tribute bands quite a lot, and there's a lot of money there, more than people realize.
Yeah, there is. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the only areas that's still paying well.
Weirdly, yeah. Okay, right. Let's do finally Roadrunner stuff.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so Realm was signed to Roadrunner by a gentleman called Monte Conner, and in fact, you have the pleasure of being his first signing, which I'm assuming was at the start of 1988. Could you tell the story of how that happened, like how he caught wind of you, how he approached you, that kind of stuff, or how that the meeting of minds occurred?
Well, that's a great question. Really, the way it happened is, at that time, Realm was, I would say, in our demo, phase. We had kind of moved on from our first lineup that we did, our very first demo, Perceptive Incentive, then released a tape called Final Solution. Mm-hmm. You think of it as a demo, but really it was, a self-released album. And, we were part of the whole tape trading culture, so we ourselves would buy fanzines and look stuff up and buy tapes from people, and then we'd send them out. But we had this policy, like we'd get a fanzine, and we would scour the whole thing for any address, record label, fanzine, radio station, and send out our tapes. We'd send out a 8x10 and a cassette, and please play our tape. And one of those people that received our tape was Monte Conner. He was DJing. Well, I think he was in school at the time, and doing a college radio show, and he was playing our tape on the radio show. And so we had a little bit of a connection there. But strangely, before Monty contacted us, and this is, I don't think a lot of people know this, when we did our first cassette, which was called Perceptive incentive. And in fact, well, I could, it's really kind of bad. I have a copy of it here, and I'm going to hold it up because for many years we created this cassette here. So if you can see this, and we didn't know any better. We didn't realize this was a famous Ansel Adams photograph on the cover of it. And if you look at it really closely, and try to get it up to the camera here. This is like, we typed this up on a typewriter, these cassette labels, and so this was like a self-done kind of thing. And I didn't have a
cease and desist from NASA.
Yeah, well, I didn't, well, from Ansel Adams. But this is like totally like a homemade kind of thing. And once again, we were sending the tapes out. And guess one of the first phone calls we got back from sending a tape out was from Case, from Roadrunner.
What year is this, by the way?
I guess, well, the tape came out, I'm going to say late 85.
Right, okay.
Well, actually August of 85 is when we released it, and started sending it out. And one day we were at rehearsal, and this is, actually like maybe 6-8 months after releasing it. And we had already moved on to new bass player and drummer at that point. Case calls us, and we're at rehearsal, and we're like, nah, this isn't real. Somebody calling from Holland with a, nah, this isn't real. but it was Case calling us, and he says, I love your tape. I want to release that cassette just the way it is. And we were like, no, this is horrible. This is like it wasn't a basement recording, but pretty close,
Yeah.
And we're like, no, we have much better songs. So let us like record another tape. We'll send you that. And then that was Final Solution. And that's the same material we were sending to Monte. Ironically, Monte, because he was doing the metal show, I think he started interning at Roadrunner in New York. And he did a great job, because I think what it takes to be in that position is to be in tune with what's happening in the field, right? And he totally was, because he was on that underground level. He was on the level of the fans, right? He like us, loved metal, and so it's strange, with Monte, because we did have like a rapport going, so like we didn't like instantly like, hey, we love your stuff, we're signing you. It was more of a process. In fact, we were going through lineup changes. We from the first demo to the second demo, we switched drummer and bass player, and then it became very evident that it was not going to be optimal with our original singer. We loved his voice, we loved what he did, but there were we had some issues there, and decided to get Mark in the band. And then we had to record with Mark, and then Monte was like, well, we want kind of proof that you guys are popular. Kind of like, it's kind of funny to say it that way. But I remember sending them a videotape, and some of those video clips I think are out on YouTube of just us playing a local show, right? People actually like you and come to your shows, and I think when they saw like how crazy the crowd was, in those videos, they were like, oh wow, okay, people do like this stuff. All right, we'll give it a shot. And frankly, the selling point that he used, I think, to pitch it to the other people at Roadrunner was that Eleanor Rigby track,
Yeah.
So we had demoed that in the studio, and he played it, and they loved it, and they saw a marketing angle, and it was a smart marketing angle. And I hate being known for doing a cover song, because really for us that was a joke of a song. We played at the end of a set just to like blow people's minds.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can see your point as to why it's kind of a shame that's kind of the legacy, but at the same time, it captures the energy so well. It's so impeccably well. Like as soon as you get into Endless War, 3 songs in, I was like, yeah, I get this. I get the link there. It's a really good gateway product. So again, as I said, from a marketing perspective, it is a killer move.
It was, and it opened a lot of doors for us. We got on the radio, got to tour around. I always remember, and I think this is a story I probably tell too much, but being on that first tour, and we're driving into LA, we're kind of like coming over to Hills, and you're seeing the city, and we're listening to KNAC, the big like popular rock FM station in LA. And our song comes on, and we're like, holy shit, we're on the frickin' radio in LA, And unfortunately, only like 30 people showed up at our show, but still. I mean, in retrospect, I mean, just to have that happen, and it was a lot of fun, and it made people listen to us that would never listen to that genre of music. You know, I mean, if you put on the song "Endless War" as opposed to Eleanor Rigby, you'd probably turn it off 5 seconds later and go, you know, especially if you're not metal, you know.
And I don't mean to keep blowing smoke up your ass, but it really is, that sound is like the best part of all like the 80s metal. It's not too rooted in one thing. And there's even like, I mean, we talk about prog metal a lot when speaking about Realm. I kind of like, yeah, there's a slight leaning there, but there's a lot of what we'd call today as crossover. There's a lot of crunchy, stompy bits in there as well. And I think that there's so much to grab onto. And it doesn't surprise me that a mainstream radio station would go, let's give this a punt and see how it works. But yeah, did you? So you met Monte through that, and it was the rapport was good. I mean, I think Monte. I don't think he's an A&R guy. He's a professional metalhead. His job is to sit down and be a metalhead, and depending on whose office he's sat down in, it determines the output that you'll get from him. Did you was there an ongoing relationship there, perhaps even after Rome disbanded?
Well, I'll tell you what, I you know, after the band disbanded, not really so much. I have stayed in touch with him over the years. We've reconnected a few times, you know, in the last decade or so, for various issues, you know, and I wouldn't even call them issues. Most recently, because Paul passed away, and so that's, you know, back to that again. But yeah, I would consider him a friend, and I totally agree with you. And the reason he was effective at what he did, frankly, is because he was one of us. It's like you go to a metal show and those people, the 10 people standing at the front of the stage, you know, he's one of those guys, you know. And he listened to the same stuff we did. We could have the same conversation. Say, hey, did you check out that new whatever, you know? And sometimes we would just talk on the phone just to do that, you know. Yeah, man. And so
I'm hearing it a lot that he does, even bands, you know, past, present, and future. He seems to still have a rapport with them, and that's really nice.
It does. I mean, those are very fond memories. You know, I remember, you know, like we'd be working on material, for example, and it's like, hey, Monte, we got these cool new riffs, you know. And he's like, I wish I could hear it. You know, could you put it in the mail and send it to me? I'm like, hey, I got one better. So I'd take like the headphones off my Walkman and I'd put, you know, one of the earpieces right on the mouthpiece, you know, and I'd crank the riffs, you know, and, you know, so whatever, you know, we used to do stuff like that, you know. So I would, you know, be on the phone with them quite a bit in the old days. And back then, you know, we didn't have the internet to move files around. And so it's like, all right, damn it, I'll send that out to you. I'll FedEx it. you know, 24 hours later, you got a cassette in the mail or whatever. But yeah, we totally connected on that level. And you know, he started as a fan of ours. And, you know, then the fact that he ended up at Roadrunner, the same place where we made our first like record label connection, was ironic, you know, totally ironic. But yeah, he was, you know, I think we're probably the same age, you know, right in the same age range. I will tell you that Monte was bald even back then, just to pick on him a little bit. But yeah, we totally hit it off. You know, I mean, the record deal and all the business dealings aside, you know, I mean, as people, you know, I thought you know, I considered us friends basically, and I still do. I still do.
Do you have any other relationships with anyone else at Roadrunner still? I'm asking you to name drop here, but I was going to get up to, did you ever get to know Case as well? Like, again, he's an enigma, but there's got to be someone who knows him.
Well, I'll tell you what, aside from that very first phone call that we got, we never spoke to Case, you know, after that very first phone call. And we would always kind of, through Monte or whoever else at the label, you know, and probably one of the other people that we were really close to there was Kathy Reed, who did, I think at the time she took over the radio promo stuff, and she would kind of like publicist kind of activities. And I know that she moved on to like Relativity and a bunch of other labels, and is out in California now. And I guess we really don't stay in touch with her either, but I would still consider her a friend, you know.
That's a name I've not come across yet, so intriguing.
And I'll tell you what, you know, when we would get together, like if we were in New York or they would happen to come our way, you know, pretty rare, we would totally hang out, you know, go out and have a few, whatever, you know, we would just kind of hang, you know.
Do what metalheads do, just hang out. So you mentioned earlier that Case rang and said, we want to put this tape out as it is. Now that's really interesting for me because the way that he seems to structure his record deals in those days is very much like the Blumhouse. I call it the Blumhouse model. So you're familiar with the horror film studio Blumhouse did Paranormal Activity and stuff like that.
Well, I'll be real frank. No, I'm not. But
okay, the idea
I'll take
is
it on
guy,
faith.
yeah, I mean the explanation is pretty simple. What the guy does is he finances films for $25,000, $100,000, but he does loads in a year. And if one hits and goes to cinema, then all the others are paid off. And I think that's what I feel that's what Case's strategy was. And it's interesting you said he wanted to put it out as it was because he didn't have to pay for anything. However, I won't make assumptions. The working model, from what I can gather about a Roadrunner deal at the time, would be you've got you for 6 or 7 albums. All the IP, every intellectual property, all the publishing, everything is retained by Roadrunner forever. And there's no guaranteed tour support. So if you go on tour, they'll probably support you, but they're not going to write it into a contract. So if you get brought into a shitty tour, like Merciful Fate did for Manowar in England in '84, obviously it's not going to get any returns. Fuck it, they're not going to support it. And the typical advance for the first record would be about $5,000. Is that reminiscent of the kind of deal that Realm got?
In some aspects.
Okay.
So there were trade-offs in there, and that was one of our sticking points. So
okay,
I would say that we probably weren't really wise about how we handled the business affairs of it, and we were young and eager and ready to roll, and frankly, it's like you kind of have to harvest your hay when the sun is shining, or whatever the phrase is. And we were, I think in peak musical form right at the time we were getting signed, and,
right.
Let me just put it like this, we didn't get a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I don't even remember what the exact amount was, but we did retain some of the publishing. And then when we got to the second record, I'd have to actually look at the little imprints on there. And then it's also written into the contract too, that at some point it reverts all back to us.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, and that was one of the things. I'd have to pull out the documents, and I think we're right at that point now where maybe those rights have already reverted back to us. And one thing I think you'll notice is a lot of the old Roadrunner bands, you don't find them on like Spotify and some of those services, because streaming wasn't an aspect of contracts back then. So that completely, I think from a legal standpoint, all sits in our own lap. And so, okay, so I mean, let's go back to the whole publishing and recording stuff. We were maybe a little too eager to sign the contract, and probably took what I think is less money than what we should have used. And whatever money Roadrunner gave us, we ended up sinking more of our own money in to finish the record, because we felt, hey, whatever this deal is, we want that first record to really kill. We don't want to put out something that sounds like a demo, because a lot of the demos I was hearing, it's like, that doesn't sound good, or this doesn't sound good. We were fortunate that one of our really good friends, Jim Bartz, he worked at a big studio here in Wisconsin, and it's the same studio that recorded the Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction, for example. So he worked at that facility, and what he had done for us with our Final Solution demo, he had taken those tracks and we recorded them at some Mishmash studios here in Wisconsin or in Milwaukee, and he took those tapes and he's like, okay, it's off hours, it's like 3 a.m. Put the reels up on those big machines, and struck the mix there, which is why that tape sounded so good, I thought. But we brought him in to do the project, and of course he wanted to be paid.
Sure.
Of course we didn't. That's kind of the joke, because we didn't have the money to pay him. We wanted to put all the money into the recording, and we actually incurred a little bit of debt to do it, to finish the recording. So I think we added maybe $8,000 of our own money and borrowed money to get the record to sound the way it did. And mind you, that was only 2 weeks of studio time.
Would Roadrunner not put the hand in the pocket for that?
Well, because we had the deal. It's like they gave us the check. We had already spent it, and we're like, shit, man, we still have stuff to record and mix and stuff.
Yeah.
So, I'm I'm not really sure where to go from here. My daughter's yelling at me from the other side of the room here, telling me I'm being too loud. So, but yeah, so we sunk some of our own money into it. But I think that's okay because I think the record really sounds good even all these years later.
Totally. It really does.
And we spent a lot of time, on like nuances of the EQs and the production aspects, and which a lot of other bands at that level didn't do. Now, I will say that when we did hit the road and go out on tour, Roadrunner was more than happy to give us tour support. So like we,
Sure.
they paid our rent, paid our bills, so we could hit the road. And so, I mean, really, we ended up getting a lot more money out of them. So we.
Is that what tour support is then? If you were to be completely black and white about it, it is literally pay the costs at home. Because normally, I thought Roadrunner didn't get involved in the tours themselves. It was usually to a separate management company who would book the gigs, organise the finances around the gigs. But Roadrunner was merely keep the lights on at home in almost a salary fashion while we're out promoting the product which we're given to you. Was that kind of the arrangement? Yeah,
that was totally it. And at that time, some of us, had, full-time careers and families and homes, even at a pretty young age. And so for us to hit the road and kind of like take away that security of a steady paycheck, we needed something, keep the lights on, keep people fed.
Right.
But we were able to tour and when you factor that money into the mix, we got quite a bit more money out of them.
Yeah.
I don't know what the exact amount was, but of course it has to be recouped through sales, right? And frankly, I don't know if they ever recouped it, because it probably got up, to like tens of thousands of dollars. We're out on the road, the bills mount up pretty quickly.
There's some instances where the label would pay for something, but it actually just be added to the band's account, and it would eventually come out of the sales, as you kind of alluded to there.
Yeah.
Would tour support be part of that as well? Then, so if you'd get the tour support, you'd be out for 4 weeks, say that, and then next year you might get, if the album doesn't sell well, you might have got a bill for that 4 weeks of rent.
You're not going to get a bill. Good luck collecting on that one.
Yeah.
A bunch of long-haired musicians, right? No, they're not sending you a bill. They're just waiting to make the sales. I think ultimately they probably did quite well. I think, it's been a long time since I've seen a royalty statement. And frankly, I think the last time I saw a check was probably, 25 years ago or something. And I think now for most musicians, I think this is the weird thing, is that revenue stream dried up, right? So the fact that we had even just a little bit of our publishing, we were getting a little bit of money coming in. And that was Roadrunner's game, right? So I think the reason that they would take the publishing is how are they going to recoup that tour support? Because you got to put, the band in a bus or whatever and put them on the road. Money's got to come from somewhere. So there's
20 years from now, people are still buying it. Okay, great. It's finally paid itself off.
Yeah. Oh, well, the sales, I'm sure, probably dwindled after the first year. That was really the reality of it,
But that's the idea behind the way the contract's sort of structured.
I guess if I looked at the terms of our contract, frankly, I haven't looked at that document in 25, 30 years. I mean, there hasn't been really much reason. And we always had this thing, when we recorded our second record, we did it at the studio of Victor DiLorenzo, who was the drummer of the Violent Femmes here in Milwaukee. And we were talking to him about, the contracts and stuff. And he's like, oh man, you guys make sure you audit your label, hire a lawyer and do an audit, right? He goes, every time the Violent Femmes did it, they were like shorting them hundreds of thousands of dollars in yeah, huge money. I mean, of course, they were much more impactful in the modern music scene than we were.
Yeah.
But we never went to the point through the effort of doing that because, the royalty statements that we were getting checks, but it wasn't really kind of like the money we thought we would be getting out of it, right? Because it is really small percentages. And I get it. There's a lot of costs involved. They're trying to recoup all the tour support they're giving us. So until you recoup that, you don't see any money. But we at least had the good fortune of getting the tour support. So in some ways, we earned our royalties that way.
I thought it was interesting how there was a royalty split, and it's just not something I'd heard of before. And in your case, there was a publishing retention on your part. So does that mean you could put Realm stuff on Spotify now?
You know, I'm not going to answer that because legally I'm not really entirely sure. I really need to look at the contract, but my understanding of it is that that was just not part of that piece of paper. You know,
Sure.
it wasn't even on the radar.
I mean,
It wasn't even
I think
thought of.
from an IP perspective, I guess streaming could be regarded as performing rights, and performing rights is like the big term that would encompass a lot of different things. So maybe it's there. I don't know. Worth looking at if you can get a few pennies off that.
Well, we've been talking, and of course, I get hit up all the time by all these, like, I would call them micro labels or whatever. Hey, can we re-release your stuff? Can we do, And I always kind of graciously make contact with people and can't let it float away.
Yeah, sure.
Because I'm not really sure where it sits legally. I do have some friends in the industry that have offered up. They're lawyers to me, basically. Hey, why don't you hire our guy? He'll go do the audit. He'll make sure everything's all straight. And frankly, it's a lot of work. And
oh God, yeah.
And I'm not too worried about the financial legacy of it, but I do think there were probably some shenanigans going on with numbers. Because back then we didn't digitize everything. It was like it was all in the ledger. And now I just look at, you can have one ledger that says one thing and a different ledger that says something else.
Yeah.
But the whole process of an audit is to really look at what was sold and what was returned and
totally.
that. And, I guess even to this day, I still have somewhere in the back of my mind that we should do that audit and try to get our fair share. But, what's it going to be, $50 or something, and I'm not worried about that aspect of it, frankly.
I've learned to sympathize with labels a lot more as a result of this. I know it's not a very popular way to approach it, but if you think about it, every penny you sink into a band is a massive gamble. And if it seems like Case maybe structured it in, right, we've got a 7-hour album deal. What we're going to do is for every $10 that is spent on Beneath the Remains or whatever, $1 going to the 7th album, $1 going to the 6th album, one's going, and they're paying for themselves in that way to mitigate that risk. And I totally get that. It's a horrible game, but I guess you got to safeguard yourself to do it.
Well, and in the era that we're talking about, I mean, there was a huge transition happening societally, right? So the internet really didn't happen for the public, at least until the mid 90s. But what was happening at the time, otherwise, I mean, we had cable television and things like MTV, right? And I don't know, people were changing the way they were listening to music. We were going from LPs and cassettes over to CDs. The radio was starting to have less impact. And I mean, and now we're fully into this modern era where music is really, who goes out and buys albums and CDs anymore? I mean, okay, I do, but I mean, a lot of people don't. I mean, people just stream, right? And I get it. Why spend money if you don't have to? If we had all these tools back then, oh my God, what we would have done. At least that's the mindset. But at the same time, it puts everybody on the same playing field, and everybody can record, in their basement studio and put it out on YouTube and have everybody ignore it. Basically, the beauty back then was, at least if you got on a record label that had some distribution, it gave you the validity at least to kind of be real.
This is a complete aside. But on Monday, I'm interviewing a guy called Hellripper. I say it's a guy called Hellripper. It's a band called Hellripper, but this is the thing. It's a one-man project. And my entire line of questioning is on that. Anyone in the industry for the last 10, 15 years has said, anyone with a computer can make a number one record. And they speak about it with some confusion and a bit of, certainly not with reverence. It's good that we've got more music out there, but monetizing it and making it into a product is a lot more difficult, and there's a lot more weeds to go through. So my question to this guy is going to be, Peaceville Records, what value did they see in you as a one-man project who's made all of your records by yourself in a basement? Because everything I'm hearing is that this is a massive gamble. What are they giving you, and what, not money-wise, but what are they offering you which Bandcamp isn't, and what are you offering them which a more established legacy act who's been around since the 80s doesn't offer? A complete aside, but it's a dynamic that I don't understand, because I wouldn't have thought anyone would have invested in a one-man project that wasn't like an industrial electronic one, a Nine Inch Nails type. But now I've got a black metal rock band who's being supported by not a mainstream label, but certainly a reputable indie label.
Right, and we have some friends here in town that are on Peaceville, Mortiscald, right?
Right. Yep.
They're one of the Peaceville bands, and you know, and here's kind of an interesting sideline. When Realm was done, I went and played with them for a while. I even did a little bit of recording.
Yeah.
Of course, death metal wasn't really kind of my thing, but you know, they were friends, and it was kind of a convenient, fun little thing to do at the time.
Yeah.
But I've kind of watched them kind of go through their thing too, and you know, they're back at it. So I think they're a completely active band now, recording albums and releasing and touring and the whole bit. And, you know, I think that's fantastic, you know, because, hey, if you're able to do it and you're willing to do it and you got the wherewithal, why not, you know?
Oh, totally. Okay. I was looking down the list. I'm still at the top of the list. We're very good at going down rabbit holes.
That's okay.
Yeah. So during the process of making Endless War, was Roadrunner involved? Did they give you notes? Did they give you guidance? Or did they just say, here's the cash, what little bit there was, we like what you're doing, crack on?
There was certainly, let's just say, you know, it was pretty much send us the check and kind of trusted us. And I think the reason they did that is because they knew that we were working with the same producer and engineer that did our Final Solution tape. Right.
Cool.
And the thing that was kind of, you know, unique about that Final Solution tape is we did it so shoestring and so, you know, kind of ramshackle. It's like we would play gigs, save up a little money, go record a little bit, and then, okay, well, now we got money to record the solos. Now we got money to record the vocals, and so we pieced it together.
Yeah.
But having, you know, once again, Jim Bartz as an engineer producer really kind of raised the level. So, and they knew that from the demo tape. So they had a trust in Jim, you know, and trust in us. And they didn't really hear it until we were done, you know, because, you know, it went so darn quick. But they were elated with it. You know, I mean, they really liked what we did.
Yeah.
You know, we had like issues, you know, of course, like when we got to like the mastering process back then, you know, we couldn't send our files around, you know, electronically. So we'd like, they got the master tape, they'd run through the mastering process, then they'd package it up and send it back to us on cassette or vinyl. And then we'd listen to it and go, no, it needs a little bit more of this, you know?
Yeah, sure.
Right. But, you know, I think that at the time, like the mastering studios in New York, I think they had like one setting on their gear and just like ran all the bands through that one setting. And it's like, this is what you get, buddy. Good luck. You know? And so, you know, we didn't even realize what the mastering process could do. So I think there was actually a little bit lost in the mastering process, you know.
Oh, wow.
And then when it was reissued and remastered, I think even more was lost, you know, because I think the modern ways that, you know, the modern way of mixing is you compress everything so much to get the levels so high that the dynamic range is basically a couple of dB. And
You'll
so
lose
what you have
fidelity.
is this oral picture that is complicated and crowded with no breathing in it. And that's not how music is. Music is dynamic and powerful. There's swells in volume. It's not all one volume. And I think some of that is lost, you know?
I'm gonna abandon the crowd who are gonna pressure you to reform Realm and put out a third album. I'm gonna join up, start a new crowd. You should get into production, man. Because when I've been reading around you as well, and obviously what you're talking about there, you clearly know your shit and it's time effective. You don't have to quit your job with the remote setting.
Well, you know, believe it or not, I have done a little bit of that. In fact, I'll say that one of the favorite projects that I worked on, because I did, you know, what I would do as a sideline. So when I was in school and in Realm at the same time, so Realm was like a full-time thing, but I was still a student, you know, I was studying business and IT. As a sideline, I would mix live sound. So there were a couple clubs in town, and I would go run the board and mix people. And then I started working at a local studio. And then I started doing projects on the side. So this local Milwaukee punk band called the Motherfuckers, right? And if you've never heard of them, you need to look them up.
Read the name, definitely.
Yeah, they are, and I know I'm opinionated because I worked on the project, but I think they're the best punk or hardcore band ever, period. They're just freaking amazing. But I you know, worked on projects like that. So if you listen to some of the recordings, we did this like in the basement on like really junky equipment, but we took our time and mixed it out, you know. But yeah, Sure. let's just leave it there.
Yeah, part time, Saturdays only.
Yeah, and I did a bunch of recording, but I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, loving doing something and then buttering your bread with it are two different things. And I mean, and you're an IT person, and in IT you can make a significant amount of money if you have skills, and hey, I got bills to pay. So
okay. The cover for Endless War. I've read that you hated it, and I've heard the story of it, and I'm going to abridge it because I know it's been well recorded, but I think I might possibly have an anecdote which you might be aware of, maybe not of. So, Endless War, it's the horse. I think it's timeless. You could put that out today on a different band, and it'd be killer. You didn't like it on the basis that, and I'm generalizing, you had a friend that had a great idea, a sketch idea that you wanted to be developed and put on to the Endless War cover.
right.
Roadrunner effectively took that, went, yeah, that's great, lads. Got an artist to sketch up what ended up being cause of death, or slowly rewrot for Obituary.
Right.
Is that about the long and short of it?
Yeah, that is the long and short of it. And actually, we were trying to think of like what would we knew we were going to call the record Endless War, and we were trying to figure, what does that mean? What does that look like? And we were influenced by all the other metal bands, so we were watching like the covers that they were putting out, and our ideal record cover, right, for the first album, and Roadrunner said no, by the way, was to just have the Realm logo on a black with red kind of gold leaf logo, and that would be it, kind of like Spinal Tap or something, blacker than black or something. But then, I had that conception, like, hey, how about like just a body sitting in the street rotting or whatever? And my friend drew it up, and it was kind of cartoony, right? Because it was really a mock-up. It wasn't really the final piece. It was just like, this is kind of what we're thinking. And Roadrunner's like, hell no, because they really wanted to see a finished piece of art, right?
Yeah, sure.
And then, boy, was I surprised, when Obituary came up with that idea and had that on their cover. I was really kind of a little floored. I was like, holy shit, that's my freaking idea, not maybe the way I would have had it drawn up, but that's just kind of how it went down. Now they kind of pushed the horse on us, and here's the thing with that, we didn't have really a lot of time to like refuse it or change it, and we thought there was something better. But I do look back at it now, and I think you're right, it is kind of timeless. It doesn't have like the cartoony, cheesy, necessarily even like a metal kind of feel to it. It just kind of has this like weird future shock kind of biomechanical, in some ways really kind of did match up really well with the music, because I always felt our music was intentionally maybe 10, 20, 30 years ahead of the curve. We were trying to think like way into the future. And I'm looking at it on the other screen right now, and I go,
it's
okay, it's a thing,
Yeah, definitely. So from what I've been reading, so take this with a grain of salt.
Sure.
So Sepultura's Beneath the Remains, they initially favored the artist mock-up of that, not the horse, what would eventually be, your drawing, your mate's drawing, the artist mock-up of that. They wanted that from Beneath the Remains. And then Roadrunner took it from them and said, no, we're giving it to Obituary. And they were pissed at that. So that drawing, or that at least impression of the drawing, has made the rounds.
Wow.
It seems.
Yeah. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. You don't have that
you're giving an insight into like the inner workings of...
it means I'm doing my job, mate. That's
that's fantastic, and it's so, it's so strange, all the strange little connections like that. And when you think about music as a whole, and all the individual people, and how we're all connected, and really the truth of this is, when you look at the metal world and you look at the people that have gone through the bands and the labels and the touring, it's really actually a pretty small circle of people.
It is.
And I mean, I can't say like I know everybody. I wasn't really maybe overly social, but there's all these weird connections that kind of spill from one to the other, and I find that fascinating. So in a way, I think it's kind of cool. I mean, and don't get me wrong, I love Sepultura, I love Obituary, I still listen to the records, I mean, they were certainly influential records, and the fact that we're somehow connected, even cooler, right.
I mean, like, the fact of the matter is, what probably happened was, and I wasn't trying to be contentious by sharing that. What probably happened was they got the sketch, went, this is a cool idea. They put it on the pile of cool ideas without knowing what it was intended for. And then it got developed and then passed around. That's probably what happened. It wasn't, I'm going to steal this idea and give it to other bands. Because just people don't sit in ivory towers and think like that. So that's probably what happened. But I thought it was just interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a practicality thing. And you know, in retrospect, I think, you know, they pushed us away from our idea, but they were really, in essence, they were right. You know, I mean,
yeah, totally. Yeah.
I at the time kind of took a little bit of offense to it. I'll be real frank. You know, I was like, holy cow, hey, you know, I have this idea, and you know, this is, you know, our music, and I want to put my idea across. But like I said, in retrospect, I'm proud of that. I think it is a timeless piece of art, just on its own. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you can put your stake in that as well. So, you know, that called the slowly we rot. That's a tongue twister sometimes. Cover came from this head. That could be a bragging right.
Well, you know, when I look at kind of like, you know, just the idea of whole album covers and stuff, you know, I look at, I'm going to share my screen here with you real quick.
That's cool.
If you don't mind. So your face is on there right now. I'm not sure if you're seeing yourself. Are you seeing yourself?
Yeah, I'm not that offended by myself.
But, you know, we had like this piece of art that was created for us.
That's awesome.
This is a cassette cover, right, of the Final Solution demo. And, you know, I mean, this is kind of where we got some of the inspiration from. Sorry. Oh, shoot. Now you're watching me fumble on the screen here.
Sorry.
But this was, you know, when we were releasing our demos and we were getting them played on the local college station here in Milwaukee, from the School of Engineering, Milwaukee School of Engineering, WMSC. And one of our DJs there, Roland Stibbe, drew this up for us. You know, he just, hey, do you mind if I create some artwork? And he handed us this, and we're like, man, that is beautiful. And he even figured out that this would go on the little spine of the cassette, you know.
Oh.
But you can see, you know, like if you think about the Slowly We Rot cover, right?
Yeah.
We're, you know, this isn't too far off from kind of that
idea. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, it didn't come from nowhere. And we gave, you know, I think if I remember right, we kind of gave this idea to Roland and he kind of worked it. But it just kind of shows you that if you want to give validity to the fact that, you know, I kind of came up with that thought, there you go.
So that was that the one you submitted to Roadrunner then? Or was that just is that the genesis of the idea that was eventually?
No, that's not the one that went to Roadrunner. I do somewhere, and it might be in that box with that sealed album. And my friend, his name was Joe Bagata, and we went to school together. Yeah. He actually had sketched it out, and he was one of these guys that was really prolific at creating artwork for people's flyers here in town, and he also borrowed cigarettes from me incessantly, so he felt like he kind of owed me like a drawing, so he did that drawing. And we were really hoping that he would do the artwork for the record because he had this very unique kind of like sketchy kind of drawing style that we really liked. And it's unfortunate it didn't work out, but in retrospect, I'm happy with it. So
yeah, whose idea was the reverse cover? So it was like just a lovely little bit of a castle on a sunny hill.
Whoever was working Photoshop at the record label, I guess. Real frankly, it's like, okay, there's some stock photo. Hey, let's throw this castle on here. This looks good.
Yeah, I guess they already got realm. Sounds wizardy.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
It must be in a castle somewhere.
Okay, so we're getting towards the end now. I promise you. With regards Suiciety, you mentioned earlier that the recording process was more relaxed. You had a whole house. You had jobs. You had family. Well, you had sorts of things going on. So you'd come in and do your bit, and that caused a bit of strife with Roadrunner. What kind of pressure were they trying to deploy? Why were they in a rush?
All right. Well, there's a good backstory on that because at the time, you know, so we kind of went through our member changes, and then we also went through this changes in management too. So when we started out, we didn't have like a manager or anybody handling us. Paul and I would do all the booking. We would handle all the business affairs. And then as we got closer and closer to working towards a record deal, we're like, you know what? The missing piece here is we need a manager, right? We need somebody that knows the industry. And so we brought on a guy in town named Eric Greif. And Eric, he ended up going on to manage bands like Death, for example. Probably one of his more notable things. I think he also helped Motley Crue get started, et cetera. And, in retrospect, we probably never should have stopped working with Eric, honestly, because Eric, he was also one of us. I mean, he was into the music. He was our age, all that stuff. But for whatever reason, we weren't kind of happy with the way he was handling things. And so we fired him, right? And then we picked up a different manager, a guy here in town by the name of Tony Seelig. And in the circles around here, he was really important because he would promote like big concerts and like arena-sized concerts. And so he had all these connections, and he was kind of a character in his own right. And he was, however, very abrasive. He wasn't the kind that would try to work things out. He was like, no, you guys got to do this, that kind of attitude.
Right.
And when we were working on Suiciety, he's like, you guys are too good for this label. He, got all into our heads. Right. So here we are with Roadrunner's money. And for the second record, we actually had a budget, and I forget what it was. It was maybe like $20,000 or something,
Were you on was it a 2-album deal with Roadrunner? It wasn't the 6 or 7, or was it?
Actually, it was, I think it was like 7 or 8 with an option after the first 2. And so really what happened is they signed us, we got to the option and they said, no, so they didn't continue on. But the way the deal was struck is they had this like increasing scale of budget amounts that we would get as advances. And I mean, I think all told it totaled up to $250,000 or $500,000 after you got through all those records. Yeah. They pretty much knew that if you weren't selling on the first 2 records, we're not going to take the option anyhow. Yeah. So, which is the case. But Tony, when we were recording Suiciety, we were striking rough mixes. He's like, this stuff sounds amazing. I'm going to start pitching it to some of my major label friends. So we were taking rough mixes of the album and shopping it. And by the way, young bands, don't do that. That's pretty uncool if you're already signed to a label. But we kind of had stars in our eyes. We thought we were maybe better than we were or something. I don't know. But we did get a nibble. So we got Island Records, which was part of the Atlantic thing, right? Came out. They loved our stuff. They came out to a couple of shows. In fact, in one circumstance, their like head A&R guy, and I forget what his name was, asked it, hey, when are you guys playing a show? And I'm like, well, man, we got nothing on the books. And so Tony had this like cockamamie idea. Let's just do a show on Wednesday. We're like, what? Like 3 days? Like, yep. So we just like put a show together. The guy flew out. We charged no cover charge. We just had just to do the show.
Just for the guy, yeah.
Yeah, and he loved it. And we're like, all right, hey, you guys are great. We're going to put you on tour with Anthrax and all this, totally building up our egos. And so what happens, and this happens in the industry a lot, especially at that time, is Atlantic got bought out. And the first thing they do is they fire all their A&R people.
Yeah.
And so
your biggest fan on Monday is out the door by Wednesday.
Yeah. So here we are, like we're drafting contracts, and then all of a sudden it's like, sorry guys, all gone. And so we were right before the record came out. We were on the verge of basically signing with Island Records, a full-blown major label, and we felt, okay, man, here we go, And then Roadrunner caught wind, right? And so I remember this. I had a conversation with Monte, and he's like, "Man, why are you guys doing this?" Basically, and so I was maybe a little too frank and honest with him. I told him what things we were unhappy about, and we felt like we deserved more money, more promo, because we were watching other bands like here in Wisconsin, our friends from Last Crack, right? Hour away from us up the road. We were watching them. They were getting on MTV. They had video budgets. They were going over to Europe to play shows, all with label support, and we weren't getting that, right? And so we're like, hey, we feel like we're being undersold or underrepresented or something. So that's why we did it, you know.
Yeah.
But then it fell apart, you know, and it also got to the point where the record, we used up all our budget amount. We still wanted to like basically remix the rough mixes.
Mm-hmm.
So what you hear of that record in some ways is kind of a rough mix because the mix was made while we were touring.
Yeah. And you weren't there to put
and I wasn't there. I was not there, and I think it suffered a little bit, particularly as a guitar player. I wanted the guitars to just be up a little louder.
Yeah.
So whatever. I mean, it is what it is. I still listen to that record and go, oh my God, you know, if a couple little mixed things were fixed, that would have been one of the most amazing records ever. And I will tell you, I am working on trying to digitize all those tracks at some point. And who knows, maybe remix it someday, but maybe not.
You know what, Matt? It's the AI technology in mixing these days is crazy. Like for the podcast, I get the raw recording, I get a raw WAV, and I chuck it straight into fix my levels because when I'm listening on headphones, I can't tell if Raw, my co-host, is the same level as me. So I just throw it in that and it balances it out. Similarly, there's some software going around which isolates vocal tracks on analog recordings. Obviously, there's nothing truly analog anymore, but it gets the frequencies, it identifies a trend, and then goes, all right, here's Aretha Franklin, so you can put Aretha Franklin on your samples. So it'd be cool if they could do that for guitars, and then you could at least isolate those bits and give them the kick they need. But
there are a lot of really cool pieces of mastering software in particular right now, where you can really do some of that isolation. But in my mind, I mean, if the EQ and the levels aren't kind of right to start with.
Yeah.
And frankly, I think that whole mix could be fixed with just bumping up the guitars. Like you just make it a little more guitar heavy, and that record would just rip your face off. And we did such a meticulous job of making sure the guitar tracks were spot on, like perfect all the way through.
Yeah.
And then when it kind of gets buried in the mix, you get a little upset about it. But I try to look past that these days and look at it as more of a picture, you know, of what we were doing, and I think it succeeds in that capacity. So
the thing about that particular story is I understood it was a 2-album deal, and I thought that was going to be a remarkable thing, but as you mentioned, it's the option. So you arrived at a point where the option was up and you effectively misbehaved. Did they not offer to remedy any of your grievances or anything like that? It was the message over you not being picked up after the option, was that driven by economics? Was it driven by the fact that you were shopping around, or was it? Because if it was a 2-album deal, I'd completely understand if it was, one of our bands is shopping around. Then it's like, well, of course, they're not going to have a record deal once this one comes out. So
right. But unfortunately, we were shopping around before the record came out, you know. So I mean, it was a little bit uncool on our part.
Sure.
But at the same time, you know, really, I think Roadrunner would have stood to benefit, you know, because if we would have gotten picked up, they would have whatever labels picking us up would have to buy out that contract, right?
Yeah, totally.
And so, I mean, they wouldn't have lost out. It's just a matter of like, do you think this music will sell? And there was a kind of an upswelling happening at that time. And so what I was seeing at shows is we would play with all these heavy bands, and death metal was on the rise, right? So here we are playing shows with people going, right? And here's Mark, you know, sky high with his vibrato and stuff. And it's kind of like a complete juxtaposition of styles. And I have this really fond memory, like we were touring with Testament and Raven, and we were like the opening act for that. And we did kind of like this Midwest jaunt here. And we played at a place here in Milwaukee, right? The tour came through Milwaukee. And Mark is singing, and he's hitting these high notes, and people are pelting him with pennies or something. They're throwing pennies at him from the crowd because he's singing high notes. And Mark jumps off the stage and runs after the guy to try to beat the hell out of him, you know. I forget how that all played out. You know, a lot of that stuff is kind of a blur. The same thing was happening to Raven, right? Same thing, because Testament, you know, Chuck Billy would do kind of high and low, so they were kind of on the edge of death metal, but Raven and Realm weren't part of that thing, right? And I remember, you know, John from Raven also getting really, really pissed because he was getting stuff thrown at him. not cool, by the way, because when you look at it back at it in retrospect, who cares if it's high or low or whatever? It's all part of the same brotherhood of metal in my mind. So, I mean, but in retrospect, when I look back on all that, I mean, that's really kind of one of the reasons why it didn't really move forward, because you saw all these heavy kind of like, it's really kind of the beginning of what we call like the new metal scene, if you want to call it that.
Yep.
And I always thought of us as being a little bit more musical than a lot of that stuff. So we weren't really necessarily worried about being the heaviest or the fastest or the darkest. We were really kind of trying to do something else. We were trying to look.
I'm zoning in around this time as well. About 91, there is a left turn. There's a massive left turn in Roadrunner. There's I was just speaking to Gary Livermore, as I was saying, so he was Third Mind. They got a partnership deal with Roadrunner in 91. There's also an imprint, which is like a dance label as well in 91, in the UK at least. So, but the thing is, these things happen before the Black Album and Nevermind, which is what I'm considering in my head must have been some sort of catalyst for the industry to make him go, shit, let's get some alt rock, let's get some industrial in there. So, but everything before then, as you say, it was death metal. That was the direction they were going until a year later, after Suiciety, it was just a weird left turn and started getting out different things. Yeah.
I mean, I think that the impact of like the Nirvana sound, I think that to me that seemed to be kind of, at least in the general popular music sense, that was kind of a pivotal point.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think there was a perceptible change in the crowds too. And that was one thing that maybe why I really didn't go back to doing it, because, I would, with my friends, we would go and hang out in clubs here in Milwaukee, and we'd go to like punk shows and metal shows. And the energy was very energetic and powerful. And people would like mosh and slam dance or stage dive or whatever. But it was communal, and it was friendly, and it was fun loving. And, somebody would fall down and we'd pick them up and hug them and keep thrashing or whatever. And then the death metal crowd came around. I remember going to a Suicidal Tendency show, right? And the big circle is going, and I'm like, fuck yeah, let's do it. And then all of a sudden there's this group of people in there that are intentional instigators, basically. Knocked on my ass and trampled at that show. And it kind of put this sour taste in my mouth. I never really kind of wanted to go back to that. And I felt there was this like negative upswelling in the music that I really didn't like, And I'm not talking about like evil. It just felt, it felt like metal was becoming fractionalized to me. There was kind of like, there was the growlers, and then there were the singers, right? And unfortunately we had a singer, and the growling fans didn't like the singing. It really was kind of
interesting. I've never heard like an anecdote like that, especially for that time. Obviously, I knew that the Florida death metal scene was really in its swing, especially when it's associated with Roadrunner, with bands like, I don't think Death did one with Roadrunner until 95, but obviously there's a load of Roadrunner bands that did the death metal thing, and I always considered it like a thing that happened. I never considered it a fractioning force.
Well, look at what happened to Pantera, right? If you listen to like the first Pantera record, they're singing on that first record. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait, people don't like people with long hair. I'll shave it all off. People don't like people singing high. Fine, I'll growl and scream. And I would see that, and we had the good fortune of playing with Pantera a number of times, and kind of saw that energy that they brought, and they were realizing, I think, the change. It was getting more brutal, basically, is really what, and it wasn't really about the musicianship of it. It was about that energy. And they tried to exemplify it in their music, But, I think what Roadrunner was doing is because of people like Monte, right? And so Monte was the person that would go to the shows. And when you're at a show, you see like how the crowd reacts to a band. And at that point in history, there was that swing going on where people were like deciding, hey, I'm like all heavy and screw all that like power metal pansy music or whatever you want to call it. And they were seeing that the crowd was into that, and so they were tapping in. And the same reason why they signed us based on that videotape, I think, is because they wanted to see that the audience had that energy.
There was a response to what you were putting out,
right? Because they knew that that's where that is tapping into where it's going, And when you look at I think back to like some of the old shows that I would go to. Like I remember seeing Slayer on their first or second tour or something, playing in Milwaukee, and they're playing at a pub, basically, or a corner bar kind of place, and there's like 20, 30 people, right? And I'm like, but these people are mad enthusiastic.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing they're tapping into. So I think what Monte was seeing was that, and how people react to those things, and that's where the money is in the long run.
It's the angle. It's the angle. A lot of it is about the angle. And it's obviously an angle. You see that the energy, you see what they're putting out, you see what the crowd are doing, what they're responding to. And I think that informs that first 10 years, especially.
Well, you're also seeing, the quality of musicianship, the quality of writing, intensity of performance, the sincerity of the musicians. I mean,
yeah.
And I think that's a piece that maybe a lot of people miss, is like, a lot of people can play, but not everybody puts the same, I guess, emotional content, or they don't really deliver their soul through their music, or whatever that piece, that magical aspect is. And I know from seeing Slayer back then that there was a magic, there was something special about it.
Yeah.
And anybody who's kind of in tune to music picks up on that pretty darn quickly. And it just always blows me away. We got to play with so many really notable bands over the years. You pick up on that vibe,
Just like I was saying about the Eleanor Rigby cover, it's just vibe. You can tell this is a fun band. You can tell. I've got 4 more questions, man. Are you good for time?
Yeah, I'm good. No worries.
Let's bring the ship in.
Yeah, before I start playing more guitar here.
This is a daft question, but I can't find much on this guy with relation to Roadrunner. So Don Kay was given a special thanks on the Suiciety liner notes. I was wondering if you knew why.
Oh, man, if you had asked me that, 25 years ago, I might be able to answer it, but there was a reason, I'm sure. I'm going to be real frank. I don't remember.
That's cool.
Yeah, I don't remember what
he might have given you a good review in Kerrang or something like that. And that could have
probably.
Yeah.
So we were always pretty good at, like, if people gave us very positive write-ups or played us on the radio or whatever, we were very sure to thank them.
This is kind of the big question, I guess. And then the last 2 are kind of silly questions. What would you have done differently, reflecting on? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Realm's still going in that you're still acting, you're still talking about it, and there's still things happening there, and you're still getting, again, I don't want to be part of that pressure to do more things, but on that Roadrunner stint, and what you might consider the conventional life cycle of the band as it was, what would you have done differently?
Well, in retrospect, I think we would have been intelligent to maybe wait just a little bit before signing a record deal. I think that, if Roadrunner picked up on the fact that Eleanor Rigby was a thing, maybe somebody else would have too. I don't know. I mean, frankly, maybe negotiated better terms, but it sounds like maybe we didn't get as much money up front as some bands, but we got some of the publishing,
that's very unique in my research that you've done something like that.
But don't like.
I'm not quite. You're not on trial.
Because I'm not like fully remembering all the aspects of it either.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing I would have said is I think that one thing that always seemed to kind of hamper us a little bit was we felt musically that things were on fire. I think as far as guitars and drums, I mean, we were always like, man, this is top-notch stuff.
Yeah.
And we struggled with our first singer. We had our moments with Mark too, and we were aware of the fact that metal was changing, and we're also kind of starting to get on Mark's case, and I was maybe a little bit guilty of this, is like pushing him too hard to kind of change how he was doing things.
Right.
Really pushing him away from his natural style. And in retrospect, I think that was foolish of me, frankly, because people have a style, and you should take that style and run with it. You shouldn't tell King Diamond to sing low because everybody else is singing low. You know what I mean? I mean, and that's kind of what I was doing at the time. And I at the time I thought, if we only had a different singer, right? And now here's a lovely bit of that is when Realm was done, and Mark left the band and Mike left the band. We were like, man, what the hell? What are we going to do now? It's like our brotherhood is broken. And, I kept hitting up Butto from Last Crack. I just kept bugging him. And I sent him a tape that we had recorded. Some people would think of it as the unfinished third record, but really it was a demo. And he dug it. And he came in and he auditioned for us by coming into the studio and singing his ideas over the tracks. Now I have recordings of that, mixes of that, by the way. But we ended up getting him in the band and found this other phenomenal drummer, Brian Reidinger, to play with us, and we formed a band called White Fear Chain.
Yeah.
And I'll be real frank, I gave up on that project too soon too. And you got to keep in mind, perspective-wise, at the time, I was like working on 2 bachelor's degrees at the same time, and then straight into a master's degree while I'm doing all this. And it just didn't seem like that important to me to kind of move forward. I felt like I needed to cut myself free, and maybe that was foolish of me. I should have stuck with that project because I listened to those recordings and the songs that we wrote.
Yeah,
we took that energy and power of Realm and married it with what I would call maybe a precursor to some of the new metal kind of style. I think that band, I think the material we wrote in that band, I love the Realm stuff, but I think the White Fear Chain stuff in many ways is far, far superior. And I think it's almost criminal that stuff didn't go anywhere. And so I guess in retrospect, I should have stuck with it because I was still working with Paul. I was still working with Steve. Butto, amazing vocalist. He really is. Because he's a musician, right? So he really understands music theory and how to play an instrument. So he brings that into the music. And then, I don't know, such an amazing pool of talent. I look back on it and go, oh my God, I was so fortunate to play with these people. These guys are like world-class musicians. I should have stuck with it, but I took a different path, and I'm not going to regret taking a different path.
Oh, sure. But, I'll keep hitting the drum, and on behalf of people who already know, obviously, what you've done, but it's never too late, man. If there's anything right, it was really interesting reflecting on that footage from last year. And obviously, I'm speaking specifically about Mark, because fuck me, he has not lost it. It's so strange. There's so many bands that sort of just pick up the guitars after 30 years, and it's sort of okay, we're about 50 kilograms heavier, and we're gonna detune it. It's didn't get that from that Hall of Fame show, man. And it's just good. I'd love it if there was a band of 60, 65-year-olds that had formed yesterday. They didn't know each other. They were just down the pub. And I'd love to see a band just come together completely out of the blue and just blow the socks off. Because it's there. It's just that I think there's a mentality around people that age who are just oh, I'm past it. It's nah, man. This is, you won't, in 1,000 years, they'll look back and go, I was 65. And it doesn't really, it didn't matter.
Right. No, well, I see that really clearly now at this, at this age, but I can't believe that, I kind of gave up on it back in the 90s because hey, I'm going to be 30. So, hey, it's time to give this foolishness up and move on to a career or whatever. But I was happy with what I was doing, because I really, it wasn't really, the drive to be famous or anything like that. We always kind of had this, really just want to play because we enjoyed playing, and we enjoyed playing music with each other, and I think that's a really important thing too. Because there's the personality of music, and some of it extends far beyond the capability of being a musician, but there's also this work ethic thing too, and I guess I kind of missed that because we rehearsed so damn much, and I was just looking back at some video footage that we shot just a couple of years ago and looking at the interview footage. So this is kind of weird. So we shot a bunch of footage. We played the show before that award show, and I finally got the footage from the video guys, and I was kind of going through it, and I was listening to everybody's interviews, and I was like, wow, these guys are really hitting on something. And the fact that we treated Realm like a job. So you look at a lot of bands, right? And I go, oh, you guys rehearse? Oh yeah, we rehearse once a week or every other week or something like that. And here's Realm, we're rehearsing like 4 or 5 nights a week and then playing on weekends. And we all like had full-time jobs or things going on. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, it's insane that we would rehearse that much, you know, but it really is it's the work ethic aspect of it. It wasn't that we were fantastic musicians, that just we worked really hard at being tight. We worked really hard at writing the riffs. And it was not just the work of it, but it was the brotherhood. It really was, you know, the camaraderie of it all.
When you were talking earlier about the magic and the energy and things that labels will be looking for in a band, I think the way I kind of see it is like metalheads especially, we can spot authenticity or we can spot inauthenticity from a fucking mile off. And I think one of the things that Realm did was they managed to access the authenticity really easily because all the overheads were already out of the way. You'd already practiced 5 nights a week. You already knew each other. You didn't have to worry about certain nuances on stage. You could just thrash out. And I think that's part of it. I think we're in the same airport and we're landing on different runways.
Yeah, that's a nice analogy. I mean, but certainly I had this confidence. You know, I would step on stage with these guys, and we would hit so tight. You know, I think we would play places and we'd be so damn loud and damn tight. We'd shock people, you know, and I saw other bands do that too. And the one I think that was probably most profound that way was probably Pantera, you know, because they had that same level of like shocking tightness and articulation. Combine that with, you know, we had a great live sound man, Brian Blank, who we'd be in like venues playing with other bands and their mix would sound like mud. We'd step up there and it would sound crystal clear, powerful, and articulate, you know, and that's really important, you know, and
what's he doing these days?
Carries. What's that?
What's he doing these days, Ryan?
He's 6 feet underground, I believe. No, he passed away. Yeah, so he passed away a number of years ago. You know, and it really made us all sad, you know, because he was a dear friend, and we never played. I think we played one live show the whole time in Realm. Okay, that's not true. It was maybe 1 week in New York. We played with a different sound man, but every show that we played, Brian mixed. Every single show. And he was like the 5th member, you know, he, having him behind the board, we knew that we would have a amazing,
all right out front,
amazing mix.
We're unsung heroes. That's the problem, was live engineers.
Well, you know, it floors me to this day. I go out and see live music now, and I think there's both from the musicians and the sound men and the sound systems. How is it that we're in this modern era with all this technology and you go see bands and it sounds like crap? I mean, real frankly, the mixes are horrible, you know, because people don't know how to mix, right? And really what it is it's a lot of over processing and a lot of bad analog to digital conversions and et cetera. But I don't think people have the ear anymore. They just think if it's loud and distorted, it's good or whatever. But the truth is we weren't really that distorted. You know, we were loud.
And you had tone.
Right. Well, thank you very much. You know, I think that we took a lot of time to tweak our sounds, make sure that all the instruments mesh together just naturally. You know, it's funny. I had a conversation with Mark just a couple of days ago, and to tell me about this interview, basically, and we were talking about, you know, kind of reflecting on the shows that we did, and Mark said he was blown away because he forgot how loud we played, and he forgot, even though we were toned down. And back in the day, you know, we really didn't rely on monitors so much. We would set up our own stage mix. We would like crisscross cabinets on stage so I could hear Paul and Paul could hear me, and we'd have a bass cab on the other side. So all we really needed in the monitors was the vocals. And now in the modern era, you know, we got like in the ears and everybody gets their own mix. And I'll tell you what, that's almost more confusing to me, you know, because I was so reliant on just stage sound and front of house and feeling it on the stage. And now you've got all this technology in the mix, and I feel like something is lost in the process of it.
I think it's all part of this. Remember I was saying the overhead when you're trying to achieve the authenticity, because there's some bands which have mixed, which are, as you say, just the wedges, just this, just that. Some of them have gone, actually turn the wedges off, I'll be all right. And there's some which are staring daggers at you because their in-ear mix isn't quite right, and it's fucked the whole show up. And it's okay.
Yeah, see, we were never one of those bands, you know. So we'd walk into these tiny little clubs and we would take like practice PA and rock the hell out of it, you know, and not really worried about the monitor mix, you know, 'cause we were good, you know, whatever we could, you know, if we could pull it off at rehearsal with just Mark coming through a couple of wedges, you know, hey, that's all we need on stage too, frankly.
Champion. Yeah. Okay. We're near to Halloween.
Yes.
Have you ever seen a ghost?
That's an interesting story. I'm going to say, have I seen a ghost? No. Have maybe perceived one. Okay, so
any kind of paranormal experiences?
We have strange, I'll tell you what, I think, you know, like my wife sometimes is a straight up clairvoyant.
Right.
We have these really weird things that happen to us. So here's a really, this is, I don't know what you would call this, right? So we're driving around in the car a couple of weeks ago. We're like out shopping for groceries or whatnot.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Terry kicks in to singing one of the songs from the Grease soundtrack, right? And I forget which one it is, but you know, one of the big hits from that. And just goofing around. And really, what she was doing is poking fun at me. Then we walk into the grocery store, and actually we went into the liquor store part of it to get our favorite beer. And, and then all of a sudden, on the sound system, that exact song.
Yep.
Okay, so maybe that's not a paranormal experience, but I feel like both she and I sometimes tap into like these weird things like that.
Yep.
And we get I'll tell you, a lot of weird paranormal stuff happened when Paul was passing away. Like,
oh man.
In really, really weird kind of ways, you know. So like he was almost passing away, and Terry had this thought in her head. She goes, "You need to call Paul right now." And I'm like, "Why?" And it says, "I just call him." And it turned out his daughter was trying to get married before he passed away.
Right.
So we rushed over and picked him up, drove him down to the courthouse so they could do the ceremony. He was like barely able to function at that point.
Yeah.
And it was all kind of on intuition, you know. So if you want to call that paranormal,
yeah, I do. That's great. That's crazy.
I'll even throw one more at you. That's even stranger, because when you look at the Endless Wear album and the song Eminence, right? And you know, Eminence is right, the one that starts like that. That was based on a dream that Paul had. So Paul, when he was younger, really kind of let's say experimented with controlled substances to an extreme degree. You know, I'm talking as a teenager, right? Yeah. And I think one night he took a couple too many hits of acid, came home, and I think fell asleep in the chair or something, and woke up and the TV's on and like the televangelist is on the screen, and he had this like dream, basically, that he was transported to the scene of the crucifixion of Christ, right? This is his dream. And he kept hearing this loud pounding noise.
Yeah.
He didn't know what it was. And he got closer and closer to it. And it turned out it was the hammering of the nails into Christ, you know. This is his LSD-inspired dream.
Yeah.
He was telling us about it. We're all getting chills listening to the story. Yeah. And so we wrote the words for Eminence and then wrote the music.
That is just metal as fuck, by the way.
Yeah, it totally is. And unfortunately, a lot of people would look at that and go, "Oh my God, these guys are like a Jesus band." You know, totally not the case. I mean, we had positivity to our music, I think, right? Instead of like preaching evil, we tried to preach positivity, but it wasn't really to tell anybody how to be. You know, it was but we had a lot of weird experiences like that, frankly. You know.
Yeah, it was my nan's birthday the other day, and she passed away 12 years ago. My dad came up to see me. I think he was putting flowers on the grave, and he was coming past my house. And he said, "So weird. Yeah, I was just pulling up outside your house, and then the song that she had at her funeral just came on the radio. Completely out of the blue." So a similar kind of experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And strangely, you know, when Paul's wife passed away too. And for whatever reason, she liked that one song, She Talks to Angels. I forget what band does it. Black Crows or something like that. And every time we would hear that song, we would think of Lori, right? You know, so because she loved that song. And then one day, Terry and I, there's another paranormal experience, totally. Terry's like, "Man, I don't know why I can't get this song out of my head." 2 seconds later, I got a text on my phone from Paul. "Dear friends, my wife has passed away."
Fuck's sake.
Yeah, so maybe, so I'm not getting as much of the paranormal as my wife is, but I feel I've been around kind of that thing, you know.
What does she do for a living? Because whatever it is, she needs to quit and go to Stonehenge or something.
Right. What does she do for a living? She's an acupuncturist by trade.
Right.
Which is an intuitive healing art, right?
She's dialed into that. I was going to say realm. You know what I mean? Yeah.
But I'm pumped. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something to it, and the fact that I think, you know, I noticed that when we did get back together and start playing with each other again, that there was this certain like magic that you can't really explain just because of the brotherhood that we have.
Yeah.
And we all plug in, play together, and there's like this thing. It's actually so tangibly weird. I can't even explain it to you. Like whatever it is, you know, we plug in and the magic is still there. You know.
Yeah. Last question.
Sure.
And then you can go and have your lunch. Anything you want to plug or promote?
Anything I want to plug or promote? Not really. You know, don't share too much on Facebook. I don't know. What do I want to plug or promote? Well, I guess, you know, we do have a couple shows lined up. You know, they were supposed to happen this past April. You know, obviously with the pandemic, they got moved forward. So we are scheduled to play the Keep It True Festival at some point in Germany. I don't know what the new revised date is. It's either spring of 2021 or maybe fall of 21, or maybe we're going all the way to 22 now for a show. And we have a local show planned too. So our hope is we play these two shows and probably that's it for us. You know, I don't really see us moving forward, but we'll see. I do have, you know, a bunch of recordings that I would like to kind of polish up and put out there just for the sake of the fans and ourselves. And we also have a bunch of video footage, and I've just started plowing through it and looking at it. And my hope is that maybe we can pull that together and maybe do some sort of documentary or live DVD combo kind of thing.
Hey man, if you like the state of this part 2 of Roadrunner, the history of Roadrunner, hit me up. I'll happily do. I'll happily do a great amateur version of Realm, the story of Realm.
Hey, right on.
Hey man, actually, you know what? So, one which I completely missed. So Tony, where's his last name? Tony Seelig.
Yes.
What's he doing now? Is he all right?
He's also passed away.
Okay, I'm going to stop asking, man.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the sad thing. We had a whole, you know, Paul passed away, his wife passed away, our sound man passed away, our merch guy passed away, Tony passed away. I mean, and you know, Eric Greif is not, you know, he's been like having his health issues, and we almost lost Steve. You know, Steve had a bout with cancer, and I'll tell you what, that really kind of freaked me out quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I thought we were going to lose him. I'm so thankful that we didn't.
So it's critically important. Well, you obviously know this, but you know, you need to record all this stuff. You need to make sure everyone's telling the stories.
Right. Well, I suppose if we were maybe a little more popular, more video footage would exist and more articles would exist. But you know, I'm not disappointed with the legacy of it. You know, I think it has adequate impact for me. You know. And it's not really the main impetus of my life these days. But hey, you know.
Yeah. Well, Takis, that was fucking incredible. That was sorry, I didn't mean to take 2 hours, but we're good at going down rabbit holes, man. I tend
to get a little bit chatty because, you know, I kind of tend to speak for a living. So.
Hey, man, it's cool. It's very cool. I don't know what else to say. Hopefully, I'll be able to get this out before Halloween and make the spooky stuff more poignant. But
I really appreciate, like, when you were contacting me through Facebook, you were talking about Satan, and you know, I mentioned to you that, like, you know, growing up, right, you know, because I was totally influenced by that new wave of British heavy metal, you know, Raven and Tank and, you know, Maiden and all those bands, and I was like, you know, I have the guitar on, right, so I thought Satan, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. You know, etc. Not that I sat and really learned the stuff, but you know,
I'll make sure I'm due to go back to them and ask them some more questions based on, because they've been corresponding by email. I was hoping to take them out for a pint, but obviously lockdown happens.
they're not too far from me. They're only about an hour up the road. But I'll make sure I'll drop your name in and see if they.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they know who I am or anything like that.
But I'm sure they'd appreciate it. That's all.
Yeah, I really love that first record.
Cool, yeah.
And I still listen to it from time to time.
Yeah. Well, I'll be doing an episode on them specifically once I get some more questions and answers out of them. So hopefully it'll be interesting to see what the parallels are between your Roadrunner experience and their Roadrunner experience and all that shit.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I could be more bitter about it, but I have really no reason to. So
it's interesting. Like I said, I think you've got the right mindset because it is a business at the end of the day, and it is. And the thing that I'm realizing is I'm talking about Roadrunner because they seem to have a narrative. They seem to have there is a bookend to this. Well, not bookend, but there's a start, middle, and end. Usually, there's labels that go and burn out. There's monoliths that have no character, and then you've got Roadrunner in the middle that has a somewhat self-contained narrative, which I think is worth telling. And then, as I was saying earlier, there's also aspects of it that speak to how it was then, what labels do then, and what they do now. And I think the commonality between the whole thing is it's a few people scrambling to make things work. That's what this entire industry is built on. So no point being bitter about it, because the fact that we're sat here now talking to each other about a band from like 35 years ago, it's such a delicate thread, and it's such a delicate pillar upon which this conversation is structured. So, it's there's only so much to be mad about, I think.
No, I agree. And and ultimately we're really looking at an art form.
Yep.
And any way that it's preserved into the future, I think is fantastic. I think clearly the scene has changed a lot. I mean, some things are common, but some things are a lot different. But I think there was an integrity back then because we hadn't really quite crossed into the digital era. And there was some magic happening, and the way that it was captured was different back then. It was a whole different kind of vibe. Yeah. But it makes me happy to see that there's still a lot of really cool music coming out.
Totally.
That heavy music is still vibrant. It might not be as top selling as hip hop, hey, but whatever, you know what? Metal fans are very, very, very loyal.
Yeah.
And I think any fractions that there were in metal, like I identified like the death metal, power metal kind of fracture or whatever. But I don't see it that way anymore. I see it all as one big brotherhood, and I think that a lot of people feel that way. I think that the scene has grown up. So I noticed that when we did our reunion show, everybody grew up and everybody became, something else, but we still have that underpinning that kind of keeps us all together.
Totally. Yeah. Authenticity.
Yeah, and it shapes our lives in a weird way. So I think that metal fans are forward-thinking kind of people. It's just in general,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure in the last 2 hours I've told you that I'm going to send you some stuff based on the questions I've asked and things like that, and I will do that. And I'm about to ask you some SharePoint questions as well. So.
All right, so you saw my SharePoint videos?
Yeah. And I work with SharePoint fairly often, so I'm bound to ask you some stuff. I can hear my daughter screaming, and I think she's about to go to bed. So I'm gonna close this out, man. Thanks again, Takis. That was incredible. I can't guarantee a lot of viewership, but it'll be on something forever, and the story will be recorded forever.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me, and it was a pleasure speaking with you. And you know what? At some point, maybe we should connect up, and I can share some of those like weird, obscure tracks with you that
definitely
haven't heard.
If you have anything that you just come across that might be worth taking a picture and just sending to me, then by all means, let's do it. Because yeah.
I have a lot of fantastic archive stuff to. Someday I'm actually working on trying to redesign the band website. I haven't touched it in about 20 years.
I was going to say, I emailed that site first and I didn't get anything back. That's why I thought I'll try the Facebook.
Yeah, you know what? I don't really check that email account. Maybe I should. Maybe I should check it. But I am working on a site redesign just to kind of chronicle things.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
But thank you, and you should get to your daughter.
Yeah. Oh, if you won't mind sending me this, by the way, you've done all the work tonight.
Well, have a good night, man. Take care.
Cheers, dude. All the best.
Take care.